So welcome to this webinar. See the high level of enthusiasm I start with. My name is Charles Stack, and I'll be the presenter for today. I'm joined by my partner, Shannon Lyons, who just clicked her video off. There, she's back. Wave, Shannon. Shannon's going to be doing the moderation and making sure that I don't fall through the cracks. She'll answer your questions, queue them up for us to both answer, and she'll be all around good help. So I've done this presentation before, but this is the first time I've done it with the advent of coronavirus. So I'll have a few different items of focus. But if you take away one thing from this half hour, the key thing I want you to take away is that while there are a lot of challenges and there's a lot of daunting things about operating in a totally virtual environment, it is a huge opportunity to implement new practices and procedures to improve your team productivity, your work processes, and your overall work-life balance. Any big change like we're all going through right now is an opportunity to build new habits. And I hope some of the best practices that we talk about at the end of this presentation can turn into those new best practices, or turn into new habits that actually improve the quality of your team function. So a little bit of overview of the next half hour, a little background on virtual teams. I'll talk about the types and particularly about the dimensions of virtual teams, because there are different dimensions that have different implications for how to optimize them. We'll talk very briefly about the benefits and then more extensively about the challenges of virtual teams. We'll touch on new processes that need to get implemented when you go virtual. We'll talk about the 8 key communication challenges that you need to put in place to make your teams effective. Talk about the rules, new etiquette policies that take the place of face-to-face. And then I'll go through what I think are the top 10 best practices that I think most virtual teams can implement pretty effectively. And then we'll give you 3 next steps so that you can continue to improve. So begin. So the internet really started the virtual team thing. I suppose you could have had a virtual team operating by phone, and back in the late 80s, early 90s, I actually ran a virtual development team that was phone, and we would ship around PowerPoint presentations and try to say, okay, everybody go to the next slide. It was awkward. It barely worked. But with the internet, it's really gotten fairly effective these days. We spent a lot of time using virtual teams for software development. That's really, I think, where the concept grew up, both with the globalization, the ability to pull talent from around the world. The offshoring of information technology was another big boost for virtual teams. And then the agile process lent itself perfectly to a virtual team process. And we'll weave that throughout this presentation. And obviously, COVID-19 is the impetus now where we're all virtual. So there are 4 different dimensions to a virtual team and 4 broad categories. The dimensions thing is important because no team is the same, and they can vary along those 4 different dimensions. If you look at the graph on the right, you'll see the 4 dimensions in what's a spider graph or a Kvyat chart. And what that does is allow us to look at our clients and see what type of team they have. So just briefly, the purpose can be anywhere from very narrow to very broad, and that would go from the inside to the outside. It can go from very short to very long, going from the inside to the outside. The location could be from a single location, even if you may be in one office, you can still be virtual. To culture, which can range from very homogenous to very diverse. And so one of the first things we do when we're talking to clients is figure out where they lie on those 4 dimensions, because the recommendations both for practices and tools can be different. And then I think teams fall roughly into 4 categories. Now, in having done research on this over the years, there are way more possible categories, but I think they can all fit in one of those 4. There's a departmental teams, which are kind of horizontal, um, project teams, which are limited duration, specific purpose, cross-functional teams, which are very popular when you have a lot of silos with your organization, but you have some gaps you want to fill. Building a cross-functional team can be a very good way of addressing those challenges. And finally, service teams, where you have multiple locations, often 24 hours, and often involve multiple cultures. So you can see how the dimensions play directly into the impact of creating those categories. The benefits, I won't spend much time on this because of the second to the last point. Productivity, flexibility, cost, talent, scalability, those are all benefits. But it's the law now in most states. You have to be virtual, so live with it, and let's learn how to be good at it. But I do want to reemphasize the point that this gives us a huge opportunity to build new, more effective processes. With all this change, it's a chance to remake some things that you have to make anyway. So why not remake them in a way that's more productive and more highly optimized? So challenges. This is, we'll spend a lot of time on this. There are a lot of challenges to virtual teams, and let me give you the broad perspective on this. We've had a million years of biological evolution on how humans communicate. We've had 100,000 years on cultural evolution, so that we learned how to communicate as teams, face-to-face teams. We use multiple channels when we communicate face-to-face, starting with gestures, facial expressions, body language, sounds, pheromones, before we even get to speech, inflection. All of those things are communication channels that we as a species have, if not perfected, most of us have gotten really good at it. And I think that's the number one challenge when we go virtual. We lose nearly all of those tools that we've adapted over the generations, or we replace them with inferior versions. So overcoming that challenge, I think, is number one. The second challenge is we're replacing those traditional face-to-face channels with what are largely software products. So we have to learn 8 new different software products, or perfect. Most of us know a little bit how to use them, but really perfect different software products that are replacing the channels that we have come accustomed to use when we meet face-to-face. And that's daunting, particularly if you have to do it in a matter of days or a week or two, to learn new tools to chat and web conference and so forth. So the technical challenge is probably number 2. And the third one, it's probably the most difficult but least obvious, is what you lose when you move from face to face and all the cultural and biological tools that we've developed over time to build trust and to feel accountable for the team output. All of that kind of needs to get rebuilt from the ground up when you go virtual. And just to draw a contrast here, if you're unfortunate enough to be in a foxhole with 8 other team members, or to be in a what people call a war room, for a particular project that has high importance in a short time frame. It's a common practice to take a conference room, turn it into a war room where a team of 8 or 10 people will sit in there all day, every day, and address an emerging problem or an emergency. That's where you get a quickly built level of trust and a very quick built level of accountability, because you see and interact with everybody in that room every minute while you're there, and you can see what they're doing. You can ask questions. So we'll take that as the extreme, right? You're in a conference room 8 hours a day, and software developers often function that way because it provides an extremely high bandwidth communication channel with very, very quick turnaround on getting information. You don't have to wait 24 hours for an email response or 2 hours for a chat response. It's, hey, Sue, question. And then if you're not ready for a question and you want to do heads down work, you put your headphones on. So that's a model that really works and builds trust and accountability. To build that in a virtual team requires a lot more effort, and we will talk about a lot of the best practices are around trust and accountability. And I want to talk about team size in relation to trust and accountability. There's been a lot of interesting research about team size. Um, and what I find interesting is that team size, no matter what industry or what uh, usage the team is put to, there's a remarkably small variation in what's an effective team. If you just take sports as a category, for example, teams are 5 players to 11 players. And that's true for nearly all sports. They all fit into that very narrow frame of 5 to 11. All the research that's been done indicates that generally teams fall into that 5 to 11 category. And as you grow a team, the level of trust and accountability decreases. And there's some more recent research that indicates that the accountability is fairly stable as you go from 2 to 5. And then at 6 team members, it starts to drop off more dramatically. So one of our recommendations, particularly now as organizations migrate to um, virtual teams, is to start with the smallest possible team, 5 or 6 people if you can, and then build up. Even so, if you have 10 people that could be on a team, maybe you try, if you can, for other reasons, break that into 2 teams. For now, 2 teams of 5. So important recommendation for organizations that are starting with virtual teams for the first time. So now's a good opportunity to take a quick break. And Shannon, you want to come back on and throw some questions to either of us?
Yeah, I sure can. So I'm going to put a question. What are your questions that you have? We'll have about 3 slides for you to populate. But Charlie, we had a few things bubble up from the items that people want to learn. The first thing is about how to motivate a team. So if we can talk about that a little bit, and then also some out-of-the-box tools that teams can use for efficiency.
Yeah, I will definitely have out-of-box tools.
Yep.
That's the whole last third of the presentation. As far as motivating team members, I think goals are the most important thing, and that's best practice number one. Have a goal sheet. I think you should have listed your long-term goals, however long the team is going to exist. So long-term goals, annual goals, quarterly goals, monthly goals, weekly goals, and daily goals, which are basically a daily meetup and Scrum. But put all of those on one document, one sheet of paper, and we call it a goal sheet. And what it does is helps focus team members to know exactly what it is they're trying to do, what what the goals are, both short, long, and medium term. So I think that's probably the best recommendation for motivating people, other than paying them and they get to keep their jobs.
Yeah, and I would add some kind of, since we're all trying to be more connected, and now having either stand-ups or small check-ins, it allows for people to be noticed. So kind of starting or ending a meeting with, we kind of call out somebody who's done something interesting, kind of give them a clap on the back, and just make that a part of the regular occurrence, so people know if they do a good job, like it's going to probably happen to them, or they want it to happen. I think that always is very helpful. It's, the positive way to motivate a team versus the kind of the deficiency. It's more of like the build on what strengths we have. So we kind of do kudos, start and end with kudos. It's a really great way.
And with virtual teams, you just need to be more explicit. You need to be more obvious about giving people awards and pats in the back, because pat in the back itself, right? Can't do that anymore, social distancing. So we need new virtual ways to give people pats on the back. So I'm going to keep going. So processes have to change. We've got multiple communications channels that are now replacing our face-to-face channels. High frequency is very important. You don't have the minute-to-minute face-to-face contact, so you need to make sure that the virtual processes are highly frequent. And this may be where most teams break down. They just don't have enough frequency of contact. And we'll keep coming back to that, but the daily scrums or meetups, instant chat, anything you can do to increase the frequency, any processes you can implement to increase the frequency of contact will both help in the communication, the trust, accountability, and virtually all aspects of an optimized team. And then I know a lot of organizations use project management tools in various instances. For virtual teams, I would say they're an absolute requirement. You need positively to have a formal project management system with accountability built in, and clarity of assignment and role. That's not no longer an option. You can't do ad hoc project management. And honestly, for me, that's been the hardest thing to do. I historically been used to just doing project management on a person to person, face to face basis, and moving to virtual teams over the years, forcing the team and myself to rely on a formalized project management tool has been the most important change. And then organizational intelligence. Again, it's a great opportunity with a virtual team to start building organizational intelligence. We'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. And then it's also a good opportunity to implement, to really focus on continuous feedback and improvement, because the software tools that we use as we implement our virtual teams also lend themselves nicely to that iteration and continuous feedback. So I mentioned 8 communication channels. Here they are: video, email, file folder sharing, project task management, chat, voice message, text messaging, and calendar. Each one of those is not optional. Every one of those is required, and you need to make sure you're communicating on each channel as best as you can. There's also platforms that combine one or more of these channels. And in a later webinar, I think we'll focus on implementing your virtual team on specific platforms, but that's not today's session. Etiquette. We need to learn new etiquette, because these are new ways to communicate. And each of those 8 channels should have its own unique protocol. They need to be well understood and accepted conventions, so that, like, for example, response time. You need to set the virtual team expectations for how quickly you respond for each one of the channels. And promoting inclusion, it's very easy in any team, virtual otherwise, for members to feel excluded. It's probably even more important on virtual teams, because it's easy to sit back and uh, turn your microphone off and do something that is not contributing to team success. So promoting inclusion across all those channels is essential. Respecting differences in time zones and cultures is important. empathy, understanding where people are coming from. And then in today's age, I think we all have learned that we need to soften our edges. Um, we need to be more forgiving, more understanding, because it's easy to misinterpret somebody when you've lost a million years of evolution and 100,000 years of culture, and the etiquette changes, and my expectations may not be the same as yours. So we'll talk about this in the product sense in a minute, but to make a mild pun, cut your team members some slack. And then finally, a basic rule of humanity: attack ideas and not people. That should be tattooed on some politicians' heads, but I don't think I'll go any further on that one. So, any more questions before we get into the best practices, Shannon?
No questions, but I think I'm talking a little bit deeper about the tools. So I'm just going to post. So for the Flashstarts team, we love Basecamp and Slack. Charlie talked about having a project management software, and that's one of the key things that we use every day. It keeps everybody accountable. We know what's in front of us. But for me, I'm a very visual person, and so for me, it's a little bit more out of the box than just having a calendar notice or just having a running list to dos. It's a to do. It's a calendar integration. It's a place to connect with my documents, and then a checklist. So as a team, we run through that every day. We also use Slack, which is a really visual sort of text messaging tool, and it allows us to keep our lanes straight. So if we have a project, we're texting just about that project. So you don't have to go through your email and through maybe your phone and try to understand, where did that piece of information come from? It's all in designated lanes. And so it's really efficient when you have to find information or when you're building a body of knowledge about something like a internal wiki. So we love those two tech tools, and I'll go ahead and post them in the chat function so that you can check them out.
And one of the things we'll ask later on, either right after this or in a follow-up email, is what tools, if any, you use and would like us to provide another webinar on, because that's kind of where we're headed with this whole process. So on to the 10 best practices. The goal sheet I mentioned. I think it's absolutely critical that everybody on the team understands what you're trying to do, and it's just amazing sometimes that those don't exist. But clarity of goals is absolutely a number one best practice, and you need to have all five of these. So an overall goal, year, quarter, month, and week. The day goals are more part of the daily stand up and the scrum, and not necessarily on the goal sheet itself. But we'll talk about how you can do scrums in a separate session. You need to deploy all 8 communication channels. That's number 2 best practice. If you're leaving one off, it's just like you were removing the ability to speak with inflection. You really need all 8 communications channels to be up and running. Tool masters, because we're deploying new software for many of us, or we're relying on software to a much greater extent than we have in the past. And each one of those software communication channels is a tool in itself. And mastery is hard to come by when you're talking about 8 different products. So one of my strongest recommendations is to assign a tool master for each product, each channel. So if you use Google Hangouts, assign a Google Hangout tool master. If you use Slack, you should have a tool master whose job it is to help other users with Slack. The first job for a tool master is to create number 4, which is the channel conventions for the tool over which they have responsibility. So if I'm the Slack master, I create the channel conventions, how to use Slack, what are the Slack best practices, what are the response time expectations and availability expectations for being on Slack, and then I post those. The other role of the tool master is to help people learn how to use tools, and then to mildly redirect them if they're using them inappropriately. I think it's a great use to get the entire team involved. It serves lots of purposes. So create a tool master tomorrow for all of the tools that you use, And each member, if you have 8 members, it's obviously 1-to-1. If you have 4 members, each virtual team member is probably going to be a tool master for 2 tools. But spread it around. Don't just have an IT support person. That would be a mistake. Spread it around. The daily video scrum, absolutely essential. You can call it a meetup or a check-in. We call it a scrum because we came from the agile background. It's just a very, very short, once per day meeting where people check in on a video conferencing system with the camera on. And I may talk more about that in a second. With the camera on, and you talk about what you're going to accomplish today and what challenges you may have, and maybe some and who can help you with those. That's one key way to build in accountability and engagement. The last 5 best practices are team size. I mentioned that 5 to 11. You should create a team drive share, whether you use Google or Microsoft or Web OneHub or any of the DocuShare, any of those products. You need to have a place where documents can go to be shared, and spend some time on the design. You need to spend time on the folder design so that it reflects your virtual team goals and design. That is time well spent. Member profiles, again, we're trying to make up for what changes when you go from face to face to virtual. And one of the things is the idle chit chat. What'd you have for dinner? What's your favorite color? Oh, I did gardening last week. So create and it can be something as simple as just a shared spreadsheet that you put in your team drive. And it should have basic contact information and that, name, email, address, the role, if they have a particular role on the team, and their social media links. I mean, you're not going to force coworkers to become friends, but coworkers should be aware of their friends' social media links so they can get a more full rounded view of each one of the team members. That's really important. That segues nicely into social bonding. For our virtual team meetings, our daily scrums, we almost always started off with an icebreaker because our virtual teams are usually new. They're either new startups or they're groups of interns or they're new clients. So we do icebreakers. And it's just a quick question where you go around the virtual room and everybody answers that quick question. What's your favorite color? What'd you have for dinner? Do you have a hobby at home? And then events. You can have a game night. You could watch a quick video over lunch. But having those events where people can virtually socialize are important. And then finally, periodic awards. Um, this is part of the feedback loop where you can improve. You want to give stars out or gold medals or bonuses or recognize people for contributing. And you can do that in a variety of ways. All of this is a means of providing feedback and generating a good, uh, rapid iteration feedback loop to improve both the team function and individual performance. So the processes that you're putting in place are both peer to peer, so you can have uh, individual team members talk about contributions from other team members. You can have your awards process based on what other team members who other team members thought contributed the most that week. We've done that. That's worked. It's also team member to leader, member to leader feedback because the leader needs to know what he or she can do better, and the members need to know what they can do better. So those are all part of the feedback loop. That's very important, and it's our number 10 best practice. I want to spend a brief moment on scaling before we come to the end here because it's a question we get a lot from larger organizations. Well, so the virtual team Scrum idea is great, but I got 1,000 people in my organization. How the hell are we going to do that? Well, the answer is it's easy through the magic of order of magnitude scaling. To make the math simple, let's imagine that we have 10 members on a team. The executive team, the C-suite, CEO, CIO, CFO, and so forth, up to 10, um, has a meeting in the morning, say 8 o'clock, and they talk about what the corporate goals are, what challenges they face short term, maybe ask each other for help or updates. Meeting is 15 to 30 minutes long. It's just a check in for the day. Each one of those C suite members also has their own team of, say, vice presidents if it's a big organization. They then go from that C suite meeting where they were a member to a VP meeting where they're the team lead. That process then repeats all the way down the organization. And here's the key part: at only 4 levels, you can communicate within less than 2 hours to 10,000 people. That's awesome. It's impossible to do face to face in a small team environment, but it's easy to do virtually. And the other key point is each person only has 2 meetings: one where they are a member of a team, and one where they are the leader of a team. So, with a very short, less than an hour, you can communicate top down in an organization of nearly any size very efficiently. So that's the scaling piece. So we're coming to the end here. Next steps. There's 3 of them. They're not exclusive. I recommend you do all 3. Um, we will answer questions that we didn't get to today. Just email them to virtual.teams@flashstarts.com. We also are offering a customized coaching webinar for your organization. We will, figure out what where you lie on those 4 dimensions and what categories of teams you need coaching for, and we'll put together a customized webinar for your teams or your team leads, or a series of those. We have a discount for thank you for attending this session. It's really going to be hard to remember. It's March 31, so write that down. And then finally, we're creating a co-learning community because virtual teams are new to so many people now. We thought it would be a great opportunity to try to learn from each other. Our role is partly to impart some wisdom that we've accrued over the last 3 decades, but also to continue to learn. And I think with the total reliance on virtual teams, Shannon and I are going to be learning a lot. So we created a website, virtualteams.flashstarts.com, which is your basic WordPress website. It's really in alpha state right now. So, cut us some slack again, but join. It's free for the next 3 months as we all learn to get through this difficult time. And we will be posting exhibits and documents, sharing PowerPoints, putting up checklists. We'll be probably doing webinars on each one of the channels, and we'll take our Toolmaster expertise that we've built up and then applying that to, how to optimize Google Hangouts, how to optimize Slack, and so forth. So join our community. I think it'll be a lot of fun. We can all learn together.
And
Shannon,
Charlie,
any final words?
we do. We actually had just one question, and it's actually something I think we missed that you had brought up in previous sessions. We had someone ask about virtual hiring and onboarding during this kind of virtual time, and so virtual Tom is something. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, that was like best practice number 11 that I think I left off. Providing continuity in teams is important for onboarding. So, in addition to having an onboarding standard operating procedure, which we assume you have, and you need to tailor that for virtual teams and put it up in your shared drive. One of the things you could do to provide continuity as team members come slide in and slide out of the team is to create a virtual team member. And this is something that, as far as I know, we kind of invented. Um, We call him Virtual Tom or Virtual Tim or Virtual Terry. I guess that's more gender neutral. Let's call him Virtual Terry from now on. So Terry becomes a fake email address. So you go set up a Terry at flashstarts.com as a virtual team member. And then when you build your team member list and you put everybody's email in, you put Terry at flashstarts.com in as a virtual team member. So when you do a group email, Terry gets a copy. And what that does is build an entire audit log of all of your email communications. So, email is generally thought of as personal. So if there was a thread that the team had a year ago on a particular topic, and you're a new member to that team, you don't have access to that thread. So by creating a virtual Terry at flashstarts.com, you now have access to that thread. So you share the email for virtual Terry, and anybody can go in there and see what the email conversation was 6 months ago or a year ago or whatever. It's just a really very simple technique to provide continuity for new team members.
Perfect. Thanks,
Anything
Charlie.
else, Shannon?
Nope. So I went ahead and I included the links in the chat. So if you guys have any questions or want to follow up with other conversation or just want to talk about what joining the community looks like, there are links up there for you. So it's easy. And thanks again for joining us. This was a really exciting webinar for us to get going, and we're excited to kick off series.
And we hope you take advantage of the virtual team community, our customized coaching, or fire us some questions. Thanks again. Have a great day. Oh, and Ken says wash your hands.